Hi everyone, and thanks so much for joining me today. I wanted to share with you why I like using the Caran d'Ache Neocolor 2 water-soluble wax pastels so much. These two containers that I have here are two of the limited edition 50th anniversary Neocolor 2 sets, and this one is the portrait set and this one is the dark set. And what I've done is I've pre-sketched some stacked pumpkins. I'm just going to randomly choose some colors. I sort of have an idea in my head of what I want it to look like. So I'm just gonna get started. I'm also gonna be using a water brush, which is a brush that has water in the handle. So I don't need to worry about having clean water all the time. And I'm also gonna be using, this is a special palette that's made by Caran d'Ache, the same company that makes the Neocolor 2s. And it's textured, so I can draw on the palette with one of my crayons, like so. And then I can take my water brush and activate it. And you squeeze the handle just to get the water started, and it turns into a watercolor. And I like to use this because then you can get a different color than what you might have. So I have a lighter brown, which is called russet, and then I have this darker brown, which is the Van Dyke brown, which is really dark. So by activating those and mixing them together, you're going to get something that's a little bit in between, and it does expand your color palette a little bit. So I'm just going to start by drawing on my page first. And one of the reasons I love the Neocolors 2 so much is that they're so flexible and you can use them different ways, and they react like crayons, but they also react like watercolor. And so I think what I'm going to do is I want to do each of my pumpkins a different color. And I'm going to start light at the top. So I'm going to use, this is called Conch Pearl. And this is a special edition crayon. And I'm just going to start by just really coloring in and outlining some of the areas. And I'm just going to start with one color first. And I'm not going to add any additional colors yet to each pumpkin. And then I think I'm going to use this darker orange peach color, which is salmon. This is not a limited edition, so this is available in open stock. So this is a little bit of a darker peach, or a darker neutral than what I already used. And I just am coloring it in just, you know, the areas that I've sketched out. And then I think I'll do the last one, more of this pink color. This one is also a special edition color. This is called Light Wine Lees. And the special edition sets, there's 5 of them that Caran d'Ache came out with for its 50th anniversary. I'm using, this is the portrait set and the dark set, but they also have a set that's bright colors that's called Pop. That's pinks and oranges, I believe. And then there's one that's called Lush, that's blues and greens. And then they do have one that is pastel, called Pastel, which I didn't really love the pastel. I thought I would like the pastel a little bit more. But I don't know, the pastel colors were just a little too light for me, but they're fun to try, fun to use. So I've filled those in, and I'm gonna come in with the Van Dyke brown, and I'm gonna be really light with this color, because the Caran d'Ache Neocolors can be pretty intense. So I'm gonna start by make sure my brush is clean first. And I'm gonna just start activating my color with the water brush. And you don't have to completely activate. You could use a lot of water and go over it multiple times and it will completely dissolve the crayon. Or you could just do a little bit and leave it. And then that way you have a little bit more texture. But usually what I do is I'll use enough water to activate all of the crayon. And it's pretty easy to activate. I'm using a watercolor paper. So there's a little bit more texture. You want to make sure you use watercolor paper. Otherwise, the paper will not be able to handle the water that you have to use. Once I've activated all my color, then what I like to do is I like to start playing and experimenting a bit. So I'll take some of the color and transfer it to some different areas of my pumpkin. So I'm adding some of this pink to the orange. And it's really just working like a watercolor paint right now, as you can see. And that's just helping to define the outer edges of the curves in my pumpkin. And I'm going to activate the brown. And that's pretty dark, so I'm going to pick some of that up and just add it to some other areas just to give a little bit more dimension. The other thing I like to do is I like to just take some water, and I don't clean my brush, and I like to just add to the background. So I can pick up some of that brown, and I even like to go into whatever the image is. And what will happen is it'll start to bleed out, and it'll make the edges a little bit softer. And I don't mind that. I like when the color moves around. Now see, this edge down here is mostly dry, so it wasn't really dissolving out. So you can reactivate it a bit by adding a little bit more water. And my style is pretty loose and expressive, so I don't mind when the colors start to run around and bleed into different areas. I really enjoy seeing what happens when you experiment with the crayons. At this point, now that the entire page is pretty damp, I'm just going to blend these a little bit more. What I like to do is I like to add color randomly to the background, and you can do that a couple different ways. You can pick up some color that I've made here, and I just tap my brush, and because the paper's wet, it's going to bleed out and just make some soft variation in the background. Oh, and I dropped a big piece there. That's fine, because what I'm going to do is take a paper towel, and I'm going to pick it up. And this is called lifting. So it's very easy to lift watercolor when it's still wet. So even though it made some drips on the background, because the background is still wet, it's dissolving and spreading out. And you can see here, I added a lot of water. So what I'm getting, this is called a bloom. So the water is actually pushing the color, and it's creating these edges. And sometimes watercolor artists don't like that. I actually enjoy that because I like getting different textures and looks to my painting. And I don't really care if things move around and create something different from what I had in mind, because I find that my paintings, I think, end up being more successful when I disregard what my original idea was and kind of go with the flow, so to speak, of the watercolor. So once I do that, I want it to dry. I have a heat gun, but you can also use a regular hair dryer. So I'm going to dry this because I can't really do too much more, and it's pretty damp. So now that it's dry, you can see I've got some cool, interesting areas happening down here, but I'm going to go back over it again with the crayons, and I'm going to redefine some areas and fill in some different colors. And I'm going to take a little bit of this darker red here. This is alizarin crimson, and I want to add it to this pink that I used already. And so I drew on here, And I'm just picking up a little bit of red because I don't want it to be too much darker. And I'm gonna come in and now just treat this like it's regular watercolor. And I'm gonna just kind of come in here, just redraw my pumpkins a little bit. I don't want to completely cover what this effect is, but I do want to define my edges just a bit. And again, I drip some of this brown. These palettes are very easy to clean. You can just wash them off. Sometimes it will stain the palette, and you can use a magic eraser, which is like a sponge. You can get it in the kitchen section at the store, and it will completely take everything off. Now, while this is wet, I want to show you another technique that you can use with the Neocolor 2, where you can take your crayon and you can activate the crayon itself with your water brush, and it will pick up color, and you can just come in and use it just like you would a watercolor. I could draw on here with this while the paper is wet, but it will create some pretty intense marks, and they are, I find, a little bit harder to activate and dissolve. If you want, you know, really heavy texture, you can do that. I don't really like to do that. It just is too heavy for me. So I'm just going to continue to redefine my outside edges, and I'm trying not to touch some of these cool textural effects that I created. And I'm going to do the same thing with my other pumpkins, but I don't want it to be quite so dark, so I'm going to come in with, and even that's still a little dark, so I'm just going to add some more water and just blend it out a bit. I don't want to do too much because I like how these pumpkins up here turned out. I'm just going to do sort of the outside edges a bit. And I'm going to go really light for the top one because I really like how that one turned out. I think it's very soft. I think it would be fun to do a set of 3 pumpkins just with this color. Now that I've got that done, what I want to do is I want to add some leaves in between my pumpkins. So I'm going to take this peach because I want more of an orange color for my leaves. And I'm going to take a little bit of this brown also. And mix that in there. And I'm going to do something really simple for my leaves. All I'm going to do is press my brush down and start with the tip, push it down, and lift it back up. And this is going to just kind of create that impression of leaves. And I'm going to go quick. And I might have to go darker in between here, but I'm going to wait and see what it looks like when it's dry. And because the Caran d'Ache Neocolors are water soluble and work a lot like watercolor paint, they can be a little transparent, so you can still see what's going on underneath. And I'm going to do some down here also. You want to make your brush go in some different directions. And let's see what else I want to do. I'm going to add a little bit more red, I think. Let me just come in here. And this red has quite a bit of brown in it, even though it's called alizarin crimson. To me, it has a pretty heavy brown base to it. This red is in the different set. This is called Carmine. This one is a very cool red though, and because the rest of my painting is pretty warm, that is not going to work real well. I'm going to experiment and just see if I can get it to warm down a little bit, or warm up, I should say. It's pretty pink, that Carmine, but I'm going to try it and see. And that looks like it's working pretty good. And because some of those leaves are still wet, it is going to bleed a bit. And I'm pretty happy with how this is looking so far. I'm going to dry this again real quick. And I'm going to go through and just re-sketch over some of my original pencil lines. And I'm going to be quick and really loose and expressive, and I want a very sketchy kind of feel to it. I'm also going to take my gold paint pen, and this is an acrylic paint pen. You have to push it down on the nib to get started. I'm just going to add some accents. I'm not going to do everywhere, but just add a little bit more. Add some fun. And, you know, my sketchbook work is really, I just like to experiment and play around. And I just love the way watercolor moves and colors change and move around. And I think that the paintings I like the most, I think I said this before, are the ones that don't turn out like I planned. Because I have a tendency to overthink and try to be really specific, and I was trained in hyperrealism when I was learning to paint, and so this is so much more fun for me to just experiment and play. And I even will add some sketch marks where there isn't any paint. I do that a lot with my flowers. Okay, so I think that's about done. The last thing that I want to do is I do want to add a little bit more spatter. I'm going to use the alizarin crimson because it is more of a brown base. And you're going to want to use quite a bit of water for this because you want to make sure that your spatter sprays. If I used a bigger brush, I would get bigger spatters. And it does take some practice, but if you squeeze and tap at the same time, it'll make it a little bit easier because it's pushing some of that water out. You just have to be careful that you don't use too much water. I probably overdid it a bit there with the spattering, but it will dry. Watercolor dries lighter, so I think it'll be okay. So I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial. So thank you so much for watching. I hope that you'll like and subscribe to this video.